Fuego Pizza presents SDP, the Steve Dangle Podcast, with your hosts, Steve Dangle, Adam Wilde, and Jesse Blake.
Let's go!
Steve, you wanted to kick off the show.
Yeah, and I already forget with what. So
oh, my God. All right, well, welcome Chris Johnston back to the show. Yes. It only took a global pandemic for us to get him back. One of our favorite human beings in the entire world, as it is. I know that he's just been avoiding us, but now that he's trapped in his condo, he's run out of excuses. He has to come on. So, Chris, welcome back, man.
Well, the truth is my lawyer has finally said it's okay for me to come back here because I set a blowtorch to some things the last time I appeared on your podcast.
It's almost been a year. It's been a we time. I think we were 9 months. You were in after the season ended last year.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. It was the Leafs cleanout day, locker cleanout day.
Wow. So, you walked right up from that to the studio.
Yeah.
And now
it's just told you everything on my mind.
And now they're, it's a year later and they're not in the playoffs again. As always.
At the time, Chris said there was going to be major fireworks in the offseason, and boy, was there ever. So,
and they can't lose a Game 7, Steve, if there's no Game 7 being played. So
exactly. Victories.
A year free of embarrassment. Chris, I got to ask you. I don't think that last episode had anything to do with. You've been extremely busy, but there was definitely a kind of a big boom after that, and I think people sort of forget it. What was your reaction to that at the time? And when you think back to it now, did any of it turn into anything kind of ooh, or like did you hear from people about it, or what happened?
I definitely heard from people about it, starting with my former boss within like a day, and it was like, "Are you sure you wanted to say all that?" And I do know certainly people that work for the Leafs listen, but I'm sure they listen anyway. It was a lesson for me, honestly. Not that I regret any of it. I certainly didn't say anything I didn't believe, but it gave me an insight into how big the Steve Dangle podcast is. That because it's weird when you're doing this. I even find this when I'm on TV or anything. You kind of forget that anyone's watching or listening. Almost, to me, it's just me, Jesse, Steve, and Adam having a chat the way we might with beer on the table or whatever, and you sort of forget that there's an audience here, and also. I don't know. It was a pretty explosive time, right? The Leafs had just lost another Game 7. We were talking about an off-season with some trades to come, including a Kadri trade. I remember we talked about, which obviously came to fruition. I don't remember all the other things, but there was a lot to digest, and it was an emotional time. So, I have no regrets, but I certainly inadvertently might have set a few bushfires around my professional circles.
Well, we got to tell you, we don't regret it. It was great.
No, it was awesome for us.
Spellbound the whole time. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, I think people should probably go back and listen to it right after they're done with this.
How much of that came true too? That's the part that there's a prescient nature to that episode that I don't know that many of our episodes have. Most of our predictions are wrong. But you come on with your actual knowledge, and a bunch of that stuff ended up happening. So,
Chris, if anyone goes back and listens, send me a note on Twitter. I want to know how much was true, because I'm sure some stuff was wrong too. I just don't remember everything that was said.
Someone will.
One of the more heated discussions I remember was, okay, so Babcock did this, Babcock did that, Babcock did that. Yeah. Okay, so we're done here. He's getting fired. Well, no, they can't fire him right away, but. And I'm like, no, so fire him. And sure enough, a month and a half into the season, it just seemed like that little period of time, that October to November blip, didn't need to happen at all. I don't know. And it seemed like it was obvious in April, the last time we had you on.
That's fair. The one thing I've thought about that, though, is if the Leafs had a backup goaltender to start the year, maybe Babcock isn't being fired on November 20th because, and it's nothing to do with coaching. I'm not even defending him at this point. I think clearly it's probably best for him to move on. And I think it's been good for the organization to have a little bit more harmony in terms of what the front office and the coaching staff are trying to accomplish being in the same space. But, there was still a scenario, I think, where the Leafs started the year better than they did. And maybe the reasons for that move wouldn't have come along when they did. And, the Leafs are probably fortunate given that they were, it appears now with hindsight, certainly going to arrive at that conclusion at some point that Sheldon Keefe the guy they had already in the organization was their chosen guy. And for all the ups and downs that happened after the coaching change, they still, I think, were the 8th best in point percentage from November 20th on. They were 5th best in the league in expected goals percentage. I think things were moving in the right direction, albeit with some hiccups and things that probably had Steve pulling his hair out on those LTRs after the game. Well, definitely.
Well,
I try to think it's a more peaceful time now for Steve. There's not as much stress.
Well, along that timeline, Chris, there's a lot of questions that we have, and we'll get to what's going. There's so much we need to talk about today, including the rumors about how the NHL would start the season, when it would start or restart, if it would, where it would go, all that sort of thing. But I guess it makes sort of sense to start in the past a little bit here with that kind of start, because it was a bit of a shaky start. One question that I've had burning in my mind, and it started the first game of the year. Actually, it started before that. It started at a press conference that I know you were at, or a scrum that I know you were at, where Mike Babcock said that he was trying to get Jason Spezza to play a certain role here, and he wanted to see if Jason Spezza was up for that role. And then start of the season, they scratch him in the first game. Now, my opinion at the time was, Jason Spezza is 36 years old, and he's probably going to platoon, and that's not really news. But it turned out that eventually, there seemed to be an intention of, I don't like this player. I've chosen not to like this player, and we've seen Mike Babcock do that with certain guys before. Certain guys he was right about, Peter Holland, that sort of thing.
From the moment he said it in preseason.
Yeah, other guys, like even after the Jake Muzzin trade, you had that famous quote of, well, it's not perfect, we'll make do, whatever. It's still Jake Muzzin coming to town. So what do you think the reasoning specifically that Mike decided Jason Spezza was not his guy from the beginning? And Jason Spezza played so well when he did play, and played really well under Keefe afterwards. Where do you think what was the reasoning there? Was there a disconnect between player and coach, or was it a message to the front office that he didn't like the team they gave him?
No, the only way for me to interpret that at the time is that it was about control. And it was about Mike Babcock making it clear to everybody that he was going to decide which players play for him, no matter who's been brought in by the front office and what pretenses they were signed under, because that was truly, I've seen a lot of stuff in my career. And look, there's times when the sort of, I guess, controversies that erupt, they erupt for good reasons. Teams are losing, the tensions are getting high. This was the second or third day of training camp. We were out in St. John's, Newfoundland. It was literally one of the coolest things I've ever been able to do around an NHL team. The way people were around it, obviously it's the third day camp. There's generally there's no tension. There's nothing in the air. It's just, you're getting back to a season. The weather was great. The place we were at, everyone seemed happy. It's funny. I'd had a really long chat with Jason, maybe 20, 25-minute interview one-on-one with him the day before this, in which we went over all the points that Mike Babcock was going to then address the next day, in which he very much understood that very little was promised to him. That he viewed this opportunity as a chance to finish his career with his hometown team, to be back close to his parents, to move, his kids permanently back to this area in Toronto where he intends to live beyond when he plays. He had turned down other more lucrative offers from other teams to take the league minimum contract to try to help the Leafs out in any small way, because we know with their cap situation that even $100,000 here or there would make a difference in potentially some of the things they could do. I got the impression he wasn't looking for anything other than just a chance to play, and would play 5 minutes, would scratch, would play 15 minutes, whatever they wanted. And then the next day, Mike Babcock saying, well, we got to see if he wants to do this. I was like, there's no way that this guy the day before would sit to a reporter and say everything he said. I mean, I don't think it had anything really to do with Jason Spezza. Unfortunately, got caught up in the middle of it. It's almost like, the kids in a divorce or something, maybe at times, where the parents are wrestling over some degree of control and where they are when. And unfortunately, it cost Jason a chance to be in the opening night lineup, which, I think was something that he handled as well as you can handle. And yeah, it's symbolic, but that's a big night. And normally they introduced the scratches on that night. They didn't then, because I don't think they wanted to embarrass him. And, I know his family was in the building. I think that was one of the games his kids came to. They also came to that afternoon game just before Christmas against Carolina. And he started in the starting lineup, I think, to make amends for that, and scored 30 seconds into the game, which was kind of cool. But this was a truly head-scratching thing, because there was just no reason at that point in time. Even if it was in Mike's mind hey, look, I don't know if this guy's good enough. He didn't have to say that on the third day of camp. I mean, there hadn't even been an exhibition game yet. I mean, there's 8 of those during the preseason. I mean, I think if we saw him play in the preseason and he wasn't good enough and the coach had to say, look, I don't know, guys, I think everyone would understand it. But it was almost like Spezza was dead on arrival here. And I think it had way more to do with friction between the coach and the front office than anything else.
So was that friction – sorry, Jesse, you want to go ahead?
I was just going to say, it's crazy to me that you guys can wrap your heads around these storylines and rehash the season right now, because it seems like a far reality from where we are.
Feels like years ago. But I want to talk about actual hockey.
Jesse, don't ruin it. Don't ruin it. I want to pretend none of this is happening.
It doesn't seem like the same life we're living.
I know.
This doesn't feel like the same thing.
Well, and so – and
I haven't used this part of my brain, Jesse, in like a month almost. I mean –
you're doing great, man.
Most conversation has been about like how are we going to restart and what's going to happen. I mean, it's nice to actually talk about what happened this season a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to do so. But I do want to, Steve. I have a follow-up question to that.
No, I know.
What do you want to do?
Chris, you got some crap in your lip.
Are you kidding?
What?
Yeah, go like that. I just know the YouTube audience is obsessive, and it was.
I don't see it.
You're good. You're good now.
All right.
By the way, that beard's
Adam.
looking good, dude.
Sorry, Adam. Here, edit that part out.
No, the reason.
I'll leave it in,
keep
whatever.
it in, man.
I'm sorry. Chris, I just know people are going to be like, ah.
So Chris, tell me this.
The memes.
Yeah. Oh, just Chris going. I'm curious about. I guess at the time, because things are so often overblown in Toronto with hockey, that you sometimes don't really take seriously some of the reports that you hear about friction and tension and all those sorts of things. And I have to admit, with Dubas and Babcock, as much as Mike Babcock's style towards the end drove me crazy, I always kept in mind what it was like before him and how much amazing change he instituted when he did come in. Later we'll talk about the Mitch Marner incident that came out later on, but friction between Dubas and Babcock must have been pretty intense for Mike Babcock to pull something like this, as we alluded to with Jason Spezza, because what he was doing, in effect, was actively dressing a roster that was less good so that he could prove a point. So it was more important, from what I'm getting, and I could be wrong, correct me on this, it was more important to him to tell front office, I'm in control, than to dress the lineup that gave them the best shot at winning. So explain to me, if you can, what the friction was, and truly, was the relationship completely frayed at the end? Were they able to be in the same room and talk? And do you find it, as a third question in this, I know it's a lot of questions all at once, do you find it somewhat poetic that Nick Petan ended Mike Babcock's tenure in Vegas? Man. Remember the Marc-Andre Fleury save?
To wrap that all together, what's his problem?
Yeah, what's his deal, man?
What's his problem, Chris?
Well, here's what I do know. They worked at it. Him and Kyle Dubas spent a lot of time on the phone. I don't think it was the friction in the sense that they can't be in the same room or anything like that. I just think that they went along and tried to work through the relationship, they both, for probably different reasons, came to a conclusion that it probably wasn't going to work long term, that they were never going to see the world the same way, and probably was going to be a challenge for them to work together. I think, honestly, Mike Babcock felt from the moment Kyle Dubas got ascended to that chair that he was on borrowed time, because he wasn't the choice of the general manager. I mean, that's typically what we see in a lot of situations around the league. And I think that he didn't really believe he fully had the support of the front office. Obviously, I think that there was a difference of opinion of the types of players and the way the team was meant to be played from what Kyle Dubas and the direction they've gone and the way Mike Babcock did things. And so, I think it was it's one of those marriages that just kind of ended. I don't think there was fireworks. I don't think there was an FU fight. I think that there was a general recognition that this just wasn't going to work at some point. And so, I don't know if Mike believed that he dressed an inferior lineup on opening night when he left Spezza out there. I mean, it's entirely plausible. He just wasn't comfortable with Jason Spezza at age 36.
But he would be more comfortable with Freddie the Goat? Like that logically doesn't make sense.
To you and it doesn't. But I mean, I think Jason Spezza, it didn't go well for him in Dallas, right? I mean, Mike Babcock knows Ken Hitchcock well. When Jason first went from a player getting 60 or 50 points to playing 10 minutes a night and being scratched, it wasn't an easy transition for him. I think that's natural. We're talking about a guy who was a superstar at the height of his career. He had to learn some things. It is something Jason's acknowledged, that he's learned how to embrace this type of role, and he still is choosing to want to do this. At a point, he doesn't need the money, and he certainly doesn't need to do this. He's had a great career, but he wants to. I think it's possible Mike just didn't like him in that role. But with him and Kyle, I'm sure Mike knew this was what was going to happen. Honestly, he might have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. And he's a coach that's been around the block. He hasn't been fired in the NHL actually prior to this, but I think the writing was on the wall for him. And the truth is, as we're talking right now, I don't know if we're going to see him coach again, and not related to that Marner incident that you might want to get into.
We do.
But I do think that I do think for him maybe this was the end of the road, and who knows? We'll see. He's a competitive guy. It's hard to rule him out. He's healthy. He's not that old, relatively speaking. There's certainly a chance for him to coach again in the NHL, but I don't think he's made up his mind that he wants to do that.
Before the Marner thing, Spezza was a guy who wasn't played really, but someone who was played but seemed to. He was in the lineup every night, but it just didn't work. It didn't mold. Tyson Barrie. What happened there? Sort of at the beginning of the season
under Mike, because there's more. There's two Tyson Barrie, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's the Tyson Barrie under Mike, who was actually playing kind of good defense, but he wasn't Tyson Barrie at all, and he had like 4 points. And then there was the guy that we saw under Keefe, who was an adventure. So I don't know. That was a lot of words all at once. But talk about Tyson Barrie. I'll be a stereotypical media member.
Well, I think anyone out there that switched jobs might at least somewhat identify this. If there's something you feel you do well and you don't get a chance to do it at the new place, you're wondering, how does this fit? How can I be useful to them? I think that's really where Tyson found himself. The fact that he really wasn't playing much power play time. He wasn't on their number one unit to start the year. And then the unit he was on has much, much less firepower than what the Leafs were showing on PP1. I mean, that's really his number one skill. I think for anyone that signs him now as a free agent, you have to be sure that you have a spot for him on PP1 and then sheltered minutes for him at even strength. I think that's what he is. I think that's where he thrives. I certainly think teams need defensemen that can do that. But, a lot of people have linked him to Vancouver, say, because he's a BC boy. I mean, Vancouver absolutely does not need that.
No.
They have Quinn Hughes. They have the next 10 years of that, and Quinn doesn't even have to be sheltered, as it turns out, because he's so good at 5-on-5. But in terms of anchoring their power play, I think that Tyson has to be very careful when he gets to free agency in choosing a place that can allow him to fill that role. And I think it was one of Sheldon Keefe's many smart things he did at the beginning was try to build everyone back up that had been beaten down. Because I got to tell you, Tyson did a media availability in Vegas. I believe they practiced there the day before they played what became Mike Babcock's last game. And I can't recall an NHLer, basically take on as much as he did in terms of blame and really laid his emotion out there, and how, being a free agent was weighing on him, and how his lack of production was weighing on him, and really didn't bullshit anything, just really gave it to us. And it's almost sad. It's hard to watch someone who as an elite athlete going through that. And then 2 days later, Sheldon Keefe's leading the morning skate before the game in Arizona, and already they show the power play units, and he's been added to PP1. And I think he scored that night in Arizona. I know he scored the next game in Colorado in his return first game against the Avalanche, and things certainly got a little bit better for him, and for a time I think a lot better for him. And I think that was a smart thing to do. I mean, if you have a hard-ass coach, which Mike undoubtedly was, you might as well build these guys up. I mean, put Matthews and Marner together for a long time, because that was something Mike wouldn't do. Put Tyson on the first power play unit. I think that was a smart thing that Sheldon Keefe identified early, and really changed the mood around the team with a few of those kind of decisions.
Yeah, and some of those decisions are ones that we want to talk about, because obviously the team performed really well in the first 20 games, winning 15 of them, and then became a 500 team sort of after that. And we do want to talk about that, but obviously before we get to the Keefe, I don't want to call it an era, but the Keefe section of the season, we have to talk about what happened. So Mike gets let go, and obviously the Mitch Marner story comes out, and then the Bill Peters stuff comes out to trumpet like a week later.
And then
Yeah, and
like-
then
it's like 40 and then
right?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Mitch Marner thing, when it broke, and was it Terry Koshan that
Yes.
put
Yep.
out?
It was two parts. It was Terry Koshan broke the story, and then Ian Tulloch broke that it was indeed Mitch Marner.
Right, because he'd heard about it. Now,
Probably saving us from ourselves in the process.
right, because everybody would have
Assuming
speculated.
it was everybody else.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, it could have been this guy. It could have been that.
yeah, which is the worst. So Chris, I guess that's a situation that might have been well known to people in and around the organization that had been around it. And I guess, I mean, we know what happened with the Mitch Marner situation. We know the story, the making of the list, and then Mike going out and showing guys. And Steve's mentioned this on the show before, because I think Mike's got a psych degree. Apparently dealing with him is a bit like he's always playing mind games. Is this a case, is this a one-off thing with Mike Babcock from what you could gather? Or like a little mind game to motivate players that went too far? Or is this something that he legitimately thought was a good idea? I mean, he must have at one point. And is this something that when you're playing under Mike Babcock, this is the kind of strain that you play under? Because there were plenty of other players, I think Johan Franzen was one of them, who came out afterwards and said, oh my God, he was the worst guy to play for.
Well, I think that it was something that he apologized for in real time, and I think that that's an important part of it, in that he acknowledged behind the scenes to Mitch Marner that it was a mistake. And so, that's probably I haven't heard any story privately or publicly during his time in Toronto that was worse, in my estimation, than that, where he clearly overstepped the bounds the way he did here. And I think where the overstepping is sort of obvious, but he betrayed a young player's trust in front of the entire team at a time when that guy is extremely vulnerable in that dressing room, because, his teammates don't yet know him. Obviously he wasn't yet the Mitch Marner even is today in terms of star power. I mean, I think we saw that it was in him, but, he was still finding his way, and that was a pretty shitty thing to do to him at that point in time. And I think
my question is, how is that not blatantly obvious? This is the highest paid coach in the game. How could that, even requiring it to be apologized for, seems a bit ridiculous when you pull yourself out from it, right? You would expect to play a guy who's making, was it $5.5 million to know that that's going to be a problem? $6 million. You would if I'm paying you $6 million, I expect more than ham-handed stuff like that. That's just me. And I know humans make mistakes, but that is one of the craziest concoctions I've ever seen in my life. And I guess, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but it's sort of like, did that not give the organization a little bit of a red flag moment? Like, whoa, what is that?
Well, here's the thing, and this is in no way a defense of Mike Babcock in this situation. But I think, really when you're the coach, it's your job to get wins, to try to get the most out of guys. And as strange as it is, and especially historically, and I think this has changed a lot and for the better in the sport, it's almost by any means necessary to achieve that. And so as weird as it might sound, I think to people that have occupied dressing rooms, guys that played in the NHL in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, they probably aren't as shocked by this kind of thing because they've seen worse and experienced worse. Again, that's not by any stretch meant to say, hey, this was a justified thing to do. But, I think that it was a learning instance for Mike, that there's a limit to his power, that he has to be a little bit more thoughtful. And I can't explain it. I can't say he should have done it. I obviously don't feel that way. What I can say, though, is that I don't think the Leafs players hated him as much as maybe the view might have been outside. My sense of what a lot of the players, and I'm talking the big name guys on this team, were feeling by the end of Mike Babcock's time, was they were frustrated by the fact that certain things would never change. They were frustrated by the fact that certain players would never play together, or that, that there wasn't more of a human touch involved in things that he did. I think even Mitch Marner has been pretty clear that he went on to have a decent enough working relationship with Mike beyond that time. That's not to say that he didn't, that he ever forgot it or just smoothed it over entirely. But I think there's an understand that you're going to get your buttons pushed a bit as a professional athlete. Now, this was a case that went too far. It was dealt with in the moment. And, there might have been some red flags, but Lou Lamoriello is an old school guy. I do think that the fact that there was an apology there, the fact the team went on, Mitch Marner had a pretty good rookie season. He had a much better next two seasons beyond that under Mike. The team made the playoffs and took strides. I mean, I think that in some ways, this was probably viewed behind the scenes by the people that knew about it all along as a bump in the road, but something that they got over, and he was still getting a positive response out of the players. Because let's face it, that team, especially in the first year, when they brought all the rookies in, Mike's second year as a Leafs coach, I mean, that team massively outperformed expectations. They had 105 points the next season, 100 points in his fourth and final full season. I mean, they were showing areas of growth there. And so I don't think there was a concern about some of the little things that where there was butting of heads along the way.
How much did that play into the Mitch Marner negotiations, though? Because there was all this talk about, before this story came out, there's all this talk about, well, the Marner camp feels disrespected by the Leafs. And when you hear a story like that, like, we didn't hear that till after, but when you hear a story like that, you can understand, as bombastic and ridiculous as his agent was, you can understand how they would feel that way. I mean, I think it's a relatable thing on a certain level to a certain point.
For sure. And I think they were stung by the way that he was dropped to the fourth line as a rookie. There were certain things that Mike did unrelated to the incident in question that I think they wondered about, maybe the team's commitment to Mitch, that maybe he wasn't viewed the same way as Austin Matthews, who, is a contemporary of his, drafted 1 year after, but pretty close, just a couple of months apart in age, and two superstars in the league. I think it probably underpinned it to a degree. Some of the frustration there and the desire, the real burning desire, I think, is what the Leafs recognized, and ultimately why they paid more than market value to sign him, is because they love the kid, they believe in him, they think he's going to get even better from today, and they realized how important this was to him. I mean, that's part of what you do in a negotiation. Is, I think, it was significant, for example, when Kyle Dubas went and met with William Nylander in Switzerland when they were at their impasse the year before, because that was when Kyle really got an understanding, okay, this isn't agent driven. This isn't his dad or any of the sort of question marks you have around the surface. This really matters to the player. And then, I think that the team has to make that kind of decision. I think ultimately with Mitch Marner, they realized that he felt that he hadn't always been given a fair shake, call it, in his first 3 seasons. And that he really believed he was as good as Austin, and that he deserved to be paid at a certain level. And I think ultimately that's why they kind of brokered peace on the second day of training camp and said, enough, we can't have this go on any longer, and got a deal done.
What's your perception of Mitch's season and how it was received? Because I think we hammered him pretty hard during the negotiations, partly because it was the only bloody thing we had to talk about, and it sucked and was awful. But I feel like he got hammered by a lot of fans, despite probably playing the best hockey of his life. So what do you think?
I think that he never fully got over the trauma of going through that negotiation. Just on a personal level. I mean, I sensed a change in being around him a lot of days. The little bit we interact with players. Obviously, I don't really know them on a human level, but I just got the feeling that that was a really difficult summer for him. And the way some of the things I'm sure he saw on social media, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, maybe some of the things he heard said about him on podcasts like this one or the radio on our hits. I don't know exactly what it was that maybe got into his mind, but when you had him late in the season saying, after a loss in Anaheim, we have to just ignore social media, and you take a lot of heat in this market. And I obviously there is a lot of noise, but I didn't sense a ton of criticism about him this year. I mean, he wasn't maybe celebrated the same way he was the year before. I don't think he had as great of a season this year as what he did the year before. He had 94 points. Him and Tavares had a great thing going. It just, for a number of reasons, maybe it was injuries early in the year, Tavares missed time. The Leafs didn't find that same mix in their top 6, I don't think, this season, even though they did have some great individual performances. Mitch is, if this is Mitch's off season, this would be a career season for most guys in the league. Like, he still played great. I don't mean to dog on him, but, I think that this was a really hard thing for him. And I hope one day as he gets older, and I'm sure he'll get through that, he'll get over those feelings. I hope he can reflect on it, because it's pretty clear this left a mark on him. Feeling as though he was all of a sudden being criticized. And, I think really the criticism was just about the business. It was about what's fair and what's right and what it does to the team. And, my sense, honestly, at least from the mainstream media, is that he didn't take a lot of heat once the contract was signed. You know, he didn't play as well initially, but he really came on there through December and January and was a star on the team, was producing a lot of points. And so, you know, I think this was a hard year for the guy, and I'm curious to see where he goes next.
Sometimes maybe I'm like, oh, you know, he's getting hammered, and the perception is this comes from about a dozen people I follow.
Yeah.
But I see them back to back to back.
That's
I'm like, wow, that's a lot.
That's the problem with Twitter. It's a bit of an echo chamber sometimes, right?
A little bit.
And a couple people can change your perception of something or skew your perception of something that maybe isn't realistic. You know what, Chris? I have to say, Mitch went from being the most beloved character in Leafs history that I can even remember.
Teddy bear.
Just loved.
Mascot.
To still being loved, but I think the issue was that people were pissed off. Average people can't relate to somebody feeling disrespected for making millions of dollars to play hockey. Right. And they can't relate to the fact that your agent is saying the Toronto Maple Leafs disrespected you. And, you know, it's like we went on and got John Tavares for you to play with. You had 94 points. How is that disrespect? Now, I'm not saying that's fair.
And he was a big part of recruiting Tavares.
Sure, 100%. But I think that, and I think this also comes with the trade. Mitch Marner's like 22. Like, of course that would affect him. But I don't think a lot of the criticism was leveled at him. It was his dad and his agent. Most people were pissed at his dad and pissed at his agent for the way they handled things or at least the perception of the way they handled things on Mitch's behalf. And I include his dad in that loosely because I don't know if his dad was involved or not. I do know his agent was. And I do know his agent, came out and shit all over the Austin Matthews contract the day after it was signed. And I wonder what that effect had. You know, Austin Matthews signed the day it was signed. They walk into the game that night, and obviously Austin's going to see those quotes, and they're best friends. So like, I don't imagine it mattered too much. But his agent comes out and says what a terrible deal that is, and he's going to take the Leafs to the cleaners. I mean, you remember that. It's part of that. I mean, fans. It's short for fanatic. You're going to have overreactions in fans. You're going to have it on podcasts and radio shows and TV shows. But at the same time, some of that was self-inflicted.
Well, do you know what his agent also did? A hell of a job for his client.
He did. He won.
He got a contract that I would not have guessed that the Leafs would have went as high as they did on Marner. And I understand it at the end of the day. And I mean, once it's over, it's over. Let's just evaluate it for what it is. They decided that going to war with him any more than they already had limited upside for them, and they believe in the kid, and so they're going to pay him more than they wanted to, and just have faith that he's going to be a superstar in the league and be a difference maker and be the kind of player that money almost can't buy in the league. So, you know, as much as you or I might have comments on the way Darren Ferris's agent, you know, did things, he did his job. He got his client rather a better deal than I think he was going to. Mm-hmm. And I think really what you're getting at here, Adam, is the trouble with pro sports is that, you know, especially when you really love a team, it's just about love. It's almost, it doesn't make sense, right? Like it's a tough thing to justify to somebody. If you have someone in your life who doesn't like sports at all, they could never understand what it is that bonds you to this thing. And so when something like business, which, you know, again, on cold hard facts, could we say to anyone, you should take less than you think you're worth? I mean, I certainly don't do that in my negotiations with Sportsnet. I'm sure you guys don't in any business dealings you do. You don't go into the bargaining room and you're like, just pay me a little bit less. I'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know,
no,
everybody wants more. It's human nature. You know, Mitch has a special skill set, so I can't begrudge him for trying to do that. But it does blend this weird mix of sort of like unconditional love, but with money. And you know, let's face it, it's definitely had an impact on how he's viewed. I don't think it's going to be the final chapter of the story, because I do think as time goes along, his contract will matter less in terms of the conversation around him. And he's still got a chance to be a hometown kid that brings a Stanley Cup home. And you know, if he manages to deliver on that at some point and is a superstar and does everything, I think that love will be reborn. But, you know, we're kind of in a weird spot where, as I say, I don't get the feeling he was totally over the way everything happened. Maybe the fans aren't totally over with it. You know, maybe this pause will be good for him and for everybody to kind of just readjust and get back to sports.
Well, it sort of seemed like the whole team needed a reset, right, Steve? Like it was sort of like they're just
the fan base, man.
Yeah, it was pretty negative.
That's one that I'm confident saying it wasn't just 12 people on Twitter. Like I would say that, and you touch on something so perfect there, the love aspect. I've covered the Peter Horacek Leafs. I covered the year they intentionally finished in last place. I've covered some bad Leaf teams as a fan. The two hardest seasons for me, in terms of how I handled it, were the 16-17 season and this one. And the 16-17 season is maybe the most fun season of my entire life. Like, just from start to finish, the way the story played out, the incredible moments, the heartbreaks, the holy shit, they actually made the playoffs, losing to Washington. I've never been so happy to see my team lose in the playoffs. I was at game 6 and I was just like, well, next year. Well, it's next year. But and this season, I don't know. I never got a grip on it. It
wasn't fun.
It slipped. It was so weird. There was that initial. I almost wish the Keefe Leafs were colder coming out of the gate, because I was like, they're fixed. Everything's great. I don't know. Well, it was a very difficult season to handle from an emotion.
So Chris, this is going to be a tough question to answer, but the Keefe Leafs were good. I mean, they were 15-5, and then the team was really bad or very mediocre. And Freddie, people were arguing about what the problem was. The problem was the goaltending save percentage dipped pretty low. And they seem to have the backup situation sorted out with Jack Campbell. There were some concerns about Freddie and maybe some injuries or just lack of confidence. I'm not really sure what it was. What are the Toronto Maple Leafs right now? If the playoffs started today, assuming they were in them,
which they will,
what is this team? And from your estimation, there seemed to be, they couldn't get the top 6 right. Matthews and Marner sort of worked together, but it didn't, but they tried it. Are the Leafs, and I guess, and the other thing was, Keefe said, and I think he mentioned it again in the press conference that he had yesterday, he said that they played immaturely. What's your estimation of what this team is?
Well, they're a team that absolutely no one wants to play in the playoffs, because they are a team that can allow 5 goals and still win 6-5. And for all the ups and downs, for all the reasons, if you're living and dying every game, as I know you guys are, that you lose faith in them. The people that aren't watching every game see what they are when they're at their best, and they're just scared that's going to come out. I think that a Leafs Lightning first-round series would have been amazing.
No.
That's one thing that we're missing out of this. I mean, we're actually just talking, as chance would have it, the first day of what would have been the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, would there be a game tonight in Tampa or tomorrow, whether they started Wednesday or Thursday? But I just think
you've been on that for 4 years. You've been on Leafs Lightning for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, you have. Mm-hmm.
I know, but we finally were going to get it. I mean, it was pretty much a guarantee. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess unless Toronto fell out and Florida passed them. But, there was a bit of a cushion there when the season was paused. I don't know what they are. I still think that they are forced to be reckoned with as an organization. I think they're set up in a tremendous way. I know that this is of little confidence for people that just want to see it happen now. But, certainly – I think most teams around the league would trade their roster straight up for the Leafs roster and take on Toronto's problems at this point in time, because there are obviously problems. There's no perfect team out there. And it's going to be a challenging offseason. I mean, I don't know if we'll get into this, but depending on what happens with the salary cap, I mean, this could be an even more challenging offseason than it was going to be in terms of how Toronto gets better and what they do with their blue line and those sorts of things. But, when you have the forwards they have, and even if it drives you nuts sometimes, I mean, Austin Matthews had 47 goals, did he, when this thing got paused? I mean, you're watching something that's never happened in Leafs history. I mean, some of these guys. And I just think that there's still a lot of time for them to become a juggernaut. And I don't know if they'll do it or not, but, they were clearly a work in progress this year. And I don't know what was going to happen next. They beat Tampa in their last game. Pretty well played game, actually. I'm with you. I thought Jack Campbell was a great addition. I mean, that guy became everyone's best friend. He's hilarious.
Yeah, he's great.
Like, it's fun to go on Instagram and just see him comment on every single other guy on the team's posts, and he's just like bigging everyone up all the time. And I still think that there was reason for hope for this year, and maybe there is if they get to play again. We'll see if this pause does them well. I mean, you're going to get the Soup Man back if they can play.
Both of them.
I don't think Andreas Johnston's going to be back
No.
But pretty much everyone but him will be available. And I honestly don't think anyone wants to play them, even if you have no faith in them, just because they're young and they're scary and they're dangerous.
Whenever we talk
Chris,
to
what do you
CJ,
think happens mentally with the team, though, on the nights when they do allow the 5 goals, or even the periods when they allow the 5 goals? Because it's definitely not a skill thing. Like, the skill is there, but mentally they just seem to collapse. Like, I remember the game right before the All-Star break. It just seems like they didn't show up, and then we all know the game Carolina with that. I think there was a backup goalie situation that happened, and they just can't get it together. But they have the skill to put it together, and they just can't do it.
Well, I thought one interesting thing that Keith mentioned actually yesterday in his call with the reporters was he thinks that they're lacking a certain degree of preparation and effort at times. And that would be the kind of quote that would have played big if we were just in a normal hockey season and he's calling them out in that way. But, I think that that's what he means by immature, that these guys, especially some of the young star players, are learning their way through this thing. I mean, I don't have a great answer for why that happened. I mean, every team does have tough times. I mean, the first Chicago team, 2010, that won a Stanley Cup, had a 9 or 10 game losing streak in that regular season before they won a cup. So this isn't something that only happens with the Leafs. And a lot of the guys were pretty open actually about how tough this year was. I heard Marner say it on a conference call that he feels like the reset's good because they almost forgot at times how good they were. Like, I don't know if they were just lacking sort of this understanding of how they can control games. And yet, despite some of the losses that dot your memory, they still won more games than 23 other teams from November onwards. And so, it's good to struggle this way in a sense. But they were clearly, if the playoffs started, there's at least 6 or 7 teams I would pick off the top of my head more likely to win the Cup than the Leafs. And I think when you're built the way the Leafs are, you shouldn't be able to say that. I mean, this team should be in that group of teams that you say, if this works out, like I would say about a St. Louis this year, a Boston, Washington, Philadelphia as they came on. I think Vegas was getting there as a team that, was really trending in the right direction when everything was paused. I mean, those teams to me were far more likely, even nothing to do with the playoff format or anything like that, to win the Cup than this Leafs team. And I think that's a challenge for them next, is they have to be in that group every year where you say if things break their way, that this team's good enough to win. And I'm not sure we were there this year. I certainly wasn't there personally.
Whenever we talk to CJ, I feel like I'm part of the Big Brother program. and you show up to be like, keep your chin up, champ. Like,
it's all right, little buddy. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. Here,
funny.
Hey, I brought 2 gloves and a ball.
We're going to talk about it. Just toss it around.
Yeah.
What's going to happen, Steve? What's going to happen? Because I know I'm going to know you long enough, like in 10 years when things are going badly, like for real, and I'm on here like this is a lost cause.
Yeah.
This generation's over.
There's going to be another rebuild.
No.
Yep.
Well, who knows? Maybe I'll develop this crazy zen and I'll be like, CJ, it's fine. Like some other guy, they're going to draft him in the 4th or 5th round. You're not even going to know it's coming. And then before you know it, it'll be there. Keep your head up, champ.
I just feel like as your big brother, I should let you know that this period of reassurance won't last forever. But
God.
When the Star Center's 22, I still think there is room here to not freak out just yet if they haven't figured everything out.
Right.
Okay.
On that point, Chris, their star center getting 47 goals. It looked like he could pass Rick Vive. How disappointed do you think Austin Matthews is personally about this?
I think he's bummed. I mean, not much gets to him, but remember the previous 2 seasons for Austin, he didn't have healthy years. And even though this year he did deal with a finger issue that was inhibiting his ability to shoot the puck a little bit, kept him out of participating in the All-Star weekend.
It was.
He yes, I know, it's insane.
Crazy.
But in January in particular, I know for sure that he was really struggling to shoot the puck. He didn't have the same feel with his stick because I don't know if it was a broken finger or exactly what it was, but dealing with a hand issue there in that period of time. He still scored like a maniac because that's the only way to score 47 goals in 68 games or whatever they played. But I think this will disappoint him because who knows if – I think he understands better than most. There's no guarantees you're going to play 82 games every year and, might only get so many cracks at 50. I know Ovi just makes it like an annual thing. So you think, this is natural. But if you look historically, even some of the best scorers like Steven Stamkos, only achieved it a couple times. I think Malkin's only been there once or twice. Even Crosby hasn't done it too often. I mean, you need a lot to go your way in a year to even have a shot at 50 in today's NHL. And so I think that'll bug them on some degree. Probably bigger than anything, though, for all these guys, is they played 85% of a regular season. They went through some of the crappy times. January and February isn't always the most fun time to be an NHL player, and they were just getting to the good stuff. I mean, they just beat Tampa on March 10th, and the playoff race was coming into view. The weather's turning, and they might miss out on one of their chances here to compete for that Stanley Cup. And I think that'll probably hurt not just them, but players around the league. I mean, if you remember the Blues right now, the Bruins, even the Flyers. I mean, how are you feeling about this? There's only so many cracks, and to have that potentially taken away from you. Obviously, we recognize why it's happening, and that there's more important things happening outside the sporting context here. But that's pretty crushing if you're a professional athlete.
How do you handicap the chances of this season coming back? Because the rumor now is, and Frank Saravalli had something I think today about a potential floating it back to pulling back to 68 games or something like that for every team, because every team has at least played 68 games. So you can say, well, at 68 games, here's what it was, and we'll null and void the last couple games or last 3 games for everybody else. Might be the fairest thing I've seen so far. Points percentage was another one. What are the chances you give the NHL season to come back? And when I say season playoffs, awarding a Stanley Cup at this point. And then we'll talk about the plan involving North Dakota that's rumored. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet. So, from what you've heard, what do you think? What do you actually do? You know anything? Have you heard anything?
I'll have to show my work here. I am personally quite pessimistic about this, mostly out of the sporting context, mostly just, what I'm watching on the nightly news, CBC every night, what experts are saying about, how they think there could be, a second wave of this virus, some of the challenges in truly controlling it, even after you start to flatten the curve. I just see a lot of logistical hurdles that are going to be difficult for any sports league to overcome and expect to play games by July. That being said, the people I talk to, I cannot, especially these last few days, guys, I'm stunned how confident behind the scenes the league seems to be that they're going to be able to play. And, I think it runs deeper than them just believing this because they're trying to keep their spirits up and they're trying to keep the light on here of hope and almost give themselves a reason to get out of bed every day and do what they do. I think that they must have some kind of information because they do have a virus specialist on as a consultant, gentlemen that practice out of the hospitals in New York City. They must be getting something from the medical community that we don't know about that allows them to think, that they're going to be able to get back. I mean, I think at minimum, this requires point of service testing, that being tests that you can be done on the spot and virtually tell you if someone is positive for the coronavirus or not. I think it probably is going to involve the development of some sort of medication that lessens the results of this. I mean, I think we're all understanding before there's a true vaccine, that's probably going to be 12 to 18 months based on what the experts have said on that, but that maybe there could be a medication in the meantime that makes it so that if you contract the coronavirus, it's not as deadly, or it's not, because that's really the issue.
Put you on a
here.
Ventilator, right?
Well, the problem with the thing, honestly, especially because we're talking about young, healthy athletes, and so they don't fall in the danger group, is that it spreads really easily. And in the environment a pro sports team occupies, I mean, there's no way to control it. That's why the mumps, went around the NHL a little bit a couple years ago and other things. I mean, as much as they wipe down every service and those NHL dressing rooms, at least when I'm in there, are as clean as can be, it's still impossible to fully limit the spread. And the fact is, we still don't understand why it just kills people. I mean, a 20-year-old woman died in Alberta, I think last week, and didn't have underlying health conditions. And so the fact that it can still be deadly, I mean, obviously I think that the league is sensitive. It does not want to put players at risk. And the fact that it spreads easily, anyway, it's a long way of saying, I just don't see it happening. But people that really know more than I do really believe it's going to happen. And so I hope I'm wrong in this case. As much as I like being right, I want to come on here and tell you what's going to look into the future and tell you exactly how things are going to be. I expect July and August that I won't be covering hockey games in any way, shape, or form, but the NHL really believes there's going to be some, and let's hope they're right.
So the plan, from what we've heard, and I don't know if Jesse and Steve have heard this, but there is the plan that similar to what the MLB was talking about with Arizona, which is there's a hockey arena in North Dakota that they've identified. and they would bring all 31 teams to the area, and they would sequester themselves. So they'd be away from their families the whole time. And they would play multiple games a day on this ice surface that would be televised. Is that a viable plan? Is there any connection to the NHL, or is that just people throwing darts at the wall? And in your estimation, I mean, that's the one way that you could say, well, if it's a closed community, although I don't know how you keep 700 guys from doing something. Do you think that happens? And is that a real option that they're actually considering?
Well, what you laid out there is sort of part of the plan. And there's many plans. I think we should go plural on this. But I think among what's been discussed is the idea of having 2 or 4 or 8 or even 16 different cities where they act as kind of regional hubs where you could do some teams. I think part of the problem here is that there's no city or there's no place where it would make sense that you could have 31 teams go. There's no logistical way, whether it's hot, where they stay, the arenas, the availability of ice, those types of things. I mean, the only places that would work are places like New York or Toronto, or places where, let's face it, that the virus is liable to spread at its worst. And so, I think that they're looking at some places with more low density populations, and that's where North Dakota comes into the picture. It's also a state that, hasn't had much social distancing. They haven't actually had to this point, and they haven't had much spread of the virus there at all. And they happen to have an arena that's basically NHL quality, albeit a little bit smaller in terms of the capacity for fans, but there's not going to be fans anyway. So, that's been one area that's been identified as a potential. I've heard that Buffalo is a potential because you do have multiple ice surfaces there. There's a practice rink adjacent to the main arena that the Sabres play in. I've heard about Manchester, New Hampshire, where they've had AHL and now ECHL teams based. I think that they're looking at a lot of different things. And so it would be wrong to say North Dakota is the plan, but certainly it's been discussed as part of the things that could happen here, because I think there's an understanding if there's going to be a playoffs, we're probably talking about no fans at this point. I mean, any scenario, no matter what it looks like.
Right.
I don't think we're getting 20,000 people in a building by July and August anywhere in North America, probably anywhere in the world, frankly.
No.
Because even the Premier League and baseball have talked about doing games not in front of fans. And so you can be more creative with where you take it. I think that they'll probably have at least 4 cities that they do this in, almost like a regional type of setup that you see in NCAA basketball for March Madness. And if it was just for the playoffs, say you just have 4 teams in each one, each division, say the Atlantic Division's based out of one place, what have you. I mean, I could see that setup potentially working, but as I mentioned in the previous answer, a lot of things have to happen in the wider world before the league can even really dig down on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a silly dream, but it is a lovely one. I do like it.
So July 10th, Steve, would you be fine to be watching hockey? It's perfect weather outside and there's no fans in the stands, so it's a different vibe. I mean, how would you feel about that?
It would require a real mental reset, I think, and for a lot of hockey fans, because I said from the beginning, or at least I think I did, when it came to the 2013 season. Yeah, because some people are like, well, whoever wins the cup, is it a real cup? I think we can say confidently the Chicago Blackhawks should have won that cup. The Final Four was the last 4 cup winners. The best teams made it to the top. Is this a real cup? Is this going to be a real playoffs and a real end of the season? I don't know.
I know people that work for teams and good teams that say it won't be a real cup. That if they could choose, and I was surprised actually. One guy in particular said this to me, and he's not an emotional guy. He works in a front office for a team, and said that he just doesn't think winning the cup this year would be anywhere near the same as what a typical team gets. And I don't think you ever turn down any cup if you get a chance. I mean, you take a bastardized version of it over never winning it. But this will be weird. I don't think there's any way around that. I mean, we're probably looking at a different format. Might be best of 5 in the early rounds or best of 3. It's going to be after all this time off. It's going to it's going to be weird, but I think it's worth doing, honestly. Still, if it can be done, it's a lot to the Stanley Cup has only not been handed out twice in 120 years.
I think you got to go with what
pretty good reason, though.
Yeah, but listen, if this, assuming it's viable, for me, some people will be jerks about it, and say, well, it's an asterisk next to that because it's not the full Stanley Cup experience after the season, whatever. Listen, man, to me, it's better than not having it, assuming it's safe. Sure. And if my team wins the cup, I don't care if there's an asterisk next to it in your mind. The Leafs just won the damn cup. I'm going to celebrate. And even if it's by myself in my room, I will be celebrating. Like, it's crazy. And I think that's –
I guess having no parade like the Raptor parade if the Leafs do it this summer.
No,
maybe.
Nothing like that. No, it would be –
We won't even be allowed. That's insane.
No. Maybe you could do an airplane parade. Like, maybe they could hire a bunch of airplanes and just fly around the city or something so everybody could see it. But you think that's a crazy idea. But
the Raptors and Leafs partner with The Sims, and you just create your guy and you walk downtown.
I love that idea. Or
all right, everyone cheer.
Just do it on Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
I can't stop thinking of the injured players, like the guys who will be able to come back if this thing actually kicks off. Because in the NBA, everybody keeps talking about if Durant and Kyrie Irving come back for the Brooklyn Nets, and it's like that's so unfair because they wouldn't have played at all this season. In the NHL, there are the same equivalents where you're getting these star players who have had these months off just to recover. And you got a brand new season with a bunch of new guys. So how can you not look at it differently if these players literally wouldn't have been in the previous season?
Well, yeah, you can't ignore history. I mean, it's funny. Mark Giordano actually made the point that he thinks it could be the best playoffs ever because teams would be as healthy as they absolutely ever could be to start it.
I like it. I like it. And
that might be a glass half full view of it from a player that wants to play it. I get it. He's a veteran guy in the league, has never won a cup. He wants to have it. But it would be kind of cool. I mean, you get a Stamkos and Seth Jones, and you guys help me. I mean, I can't remember everybody who was out.
Big stud like Mikheyev.
Exact same.
Yes.
Game changer.
Future Hall of Famer like Ilya Mikheyev.
Hall of Fame quotes so far. So
he's a great guy too. I'm not actually making fun of him.
Ilya Mikheyev has said a grand total of like 6 words, and we're like, love that guy. He's
great. The new Leo Komarov. He is.
He's got like 22 career NHL points or something, and he's just
and I can remember every single one of them. I can remember every single one of them.
The glue that holds us together. Ilya Mikheyev. Love him. Like,
who knew? And this time it would be a Russian man.
It was funny. It was funny to hear McDavid say what he said. What? We're just gonna have Flames Oilers right out the gate, and we'll kill each other. Like, what?
Yeah, it would be amazing.
I would imagine more players would actually be on McDavid's side there than Giordano. I think that's the 37-year-old or whatever it is, and Giordano talking.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what McDavid was saying is they just need to have regular season games.
Right.
Like he's not against having the playoffs be salvaged in some form. It's just, I get it. He said it would be turned into Bakersfield, Stockton, I think, because there'd be so many injuries and stuff right out of the gate if it was Calgary, Edmonton.
Yeah.
My understanding, honestly, I think the league would prefer to have the regular season, but I think they're being realistic at this point. And either you're going to see a play-in type of format, say 7 versus 10, 8 versus 9 in the conference, and maybe some exhibition games for the other teams that are already kind of exempted from that. I don't think we're really going to see, regular season games. I could be wrong, but I don't see them dragging the Detroit Red Wings back to go through a 2 or 3 week training camp to play a couple games. Or cool. San Jose, or Anaheim, or Ottawa, or any of the teams that clearly are out of it. I mean, I think it is almost cruel, and it's who's going to want to watch those games in those markets. I think there's the fairest way to do it is to maybe expand it beyond just 16, because it would be unfortunate if someone missed by a point and had no idea that the season was about to be ending. But I don't think you're going to see truly regular season games in 1920 again.
Yeah, well, I think anybody who's a Red Wings fan will probably just be grateful to hear that.
This was going to be maybe one of the all-time bad seasons, and now it has an asterisk.
Yeah.
They got saved for themselves.
Yeah, it's true.
We might have gone on like a 10-game heater to end the season. win a dozen straight games. It's going to be really funny though if they do have that little play-in, and then all the hockey fans who annually goof on baseball for having a big champagne party every time they qualify for the wild card game. We made the playoffs. Those will be the most. Some of the most hotly contested, memorable regular season games of your life.
Yeah, they'll be amazing.
I think it'd be awesome. And I actually believe, in fact, I know part of the discussion that's happened with the players in the league is on changing the playoff format for next season too. Like making what happens be something that is more permanent down the road. I don't think they've decided on anything. I don't think there's one format. Don't read into that. But I know that that's been part of the discussion, that if they're going to change the format now, since we're doing this, I mean, let's maybe announce a larger changes. Do we want to add more playoff teams? And I think when you're going to 32, as they are with Seattle, there's room for me for 4 more teams, at least to get a little bit of a play-in wild card type of situation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they'll get rid of the stupid divisional format that they've been on with, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like this top 3 and then top 3 and then 2 wild. Like, is this necessary? Can't we just see some teams play some hockey and go from there?
Them in the order that they finish in the standings and not in the division. Yeah.
Why does the NHL insist on this artificial thing?
Because they're getting Leafs Bruins every year, and they're getting Pittsburgh Washington playing 3 or 4 times. I mean, I think that's why they do it. I don't like it. I mean, I haven't found the logic to be all that sound of playing 82 games and then potentially having
it's just money.
The first, 3rd, and 5th overall team in the league, have to go through each other in the first 2 rounds. Mm-hmm. It seems like, what was the point of being that great over 82 games? You don't really get much reward there. I don't know though. The league they've held firm on this, so I'm not going to promise you that's ending, but I do think coming out of this, you're going to see more than 16 playoff teams in the future years.
Interesting. Well, it's totally money driven, right? It's to make sure that, the problem is that for a lot of markets, it just pisses you off, right? Like these hardcore markets that have seen their teams play so well all year, and they're out in the first round because they're playing the team that's just ahead of them by a point, rather than playing a team that stinks and gets through to the 3rd or 2nd round, I guess. That part of it, I think, will burn the NHL over a period of time. I think you'll see a rebellion for fans who are like, what the hell, man? Like, why are we going to these games and paying this money if we just have to play a team just ahead of us? And I'm a Leaf fan, so obviously that's a thing. And I don't mind them playing Boston. I just want them to play Boston because they should play Boston, not artificially play Boston.
Well, and the problem is that last year didn't do much for the argument because there's so many upsets, right? I mean, Carolina beats Washington. You get Pittsburgh swept by the Islanders. Mm-hmm. There's Tampa obviously losing to Columbus. It kind of undid that argument that I've been making, like you, that the best team isn't getting a fair shake here. Well, maybe.
But that's the playoffs. That's always been the playoffs, though, right? That's always been what's happened. It's just that these teams shouldn't have been playing each other. Period.
I like the 1-8 in the conference. Honestly,
yeah. That was wrong with that.
Yeah.
That had more semblance of fair to it than what we've seen in this new format.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited for the play-ins though, because I do think the problem you have is if you cut it off at 16, like the 17th, 18th, 19th teams, there's not that much difference. I mean, right now, if we're looking at the West, that's kind of like choosing between Winnipeg, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. Like all those teams are kind of on the bubble one way. I don't have any issue with making it a little bit larger and just having, even if it's just 2 out of 3. I think, in fact, it would add a little bit of spice.
What would you rather play in the playoffs if you're an NHL team? Would you rather play 4 games or 7? What's harder?
What do you mean, to sweep?
What?
Yeah. What's harder, playing 7 playoff games or 4?
Harder. 7 harder.
So let me throw this hot take out there.
It's like when Kadri got asked by Randy Carlyle and he didn't know what to answer. Like,
I don't get it.
I'll throw this hot take out there. Last year, the current playoff format screwed the Bruins out of a cup. They played a 7-game series against the Leafs in the first round when they very shouldn't have. They could have taken on the 7th place team in the conference, which was Carolina, who they ended up sweeping in the Eastern Conference.
6 games against Columbus, round 2.
Yep.
Yeah.
A Columbus team that outplayed itself.
They swept Carolina.
They swept Carolina. They lost the Stanley Cup by 1 game.
Mm-hmm.
1. It screwed them out of a cup. They should have won. There it is. Sorry, Blues fans.
I don't know how scientific that is, Steve.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. The president would trust it. That's how scientific it is.
Wow.
I'm throwing it out there.
Damn.
That's right.
Well, if the president
I don't know.
says.
St. Louis won a Game 7 at TD Garden. I mean, Boston had a chance to win it, and they didn't.
So did the Leafs.
Now you're just saying things that never happened. Now you're just saying impossible things.
Yeah.
It was Carl Gunnarsson. It was Carl Gunnarsson's last stand after being part of that 2013 team.
Damn.
That felt a little good.
It must have been great for Tyler.
What a good guy Carl is. Yeah, Tyler. That's a great thing about hockey. No matter what team wins, I know you guys have allegiances, but there's always so many great stories built into every champion.
Of course.
And at least one ex-Leaf, you know?
Yeah, always.
Every year. Every single time.
Yes. They have cross-pollinated right across the NHL,
yeah.
So there is one everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, kind of comes with the territory of burning a team to ash.
Chris, what does this loss in revenue do to the salary cap next year?
Well, there's not an easy answer. It's not going to go down because because they basically can choose the number. The number, without getting too deep into all the math part of this, is it can be dictated by the league and the Players Association. So what's been talked about right now is basically maybe using the current level of 81.5, maybe putting it to 82.5 million and setting it there for the next 2 or 3 seasons, keeping it fixed. And, that would be done to kind of allow the players to start making back more than their share of the money because they're taking too much right now. And again, the simplest of terms about the way the system works, where what the players are paid is linked directly to the revenue the league brings in. And so, what it does to a lot of teams, I think, this is actually going to be the craziest offseason whenever it starts that we've ever seen, I think, because you're going to have a lot of teams, of which the Leafs are one, but there's a lot of them that have committed money already that are going to be in a very tight salary cap spot. I think you're going to have free agents that are viewing free agency differently, in that, they're going to probably be paying 20 or 30% escrow players next year, meaning what you sign your contract for isn't the actual amount of money you're getting. And so maybe
30%. Oh my God.
So you're getting less than half probably after tax.
After tax and what you pay your agent and everything. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but here's the thing. And look, there's some things that could happen between then and now in terms of a new CBA that might change that. But that's kind of what we're looking at with what we know today for sure. And so I think what you might see with some of the free agents is you might see those guys make different decisions than they would have in the old system. I mean, maybe a guy like Alex Pietrangelo goes someone for 1 or 2 years, and in the money part of it isn't as important because he wants to be a free agent again when you anticipate things getting more back to normal. I'm just throwing a name out there. I haven't asked Alex or his agent. But like Torrey Krug,
I know a place he could go.
And look, I actually think
Florida.
in his case, I don't think he has much interest in coming to Toronto, honestly.
Oh,
but
yeah. Well, I don't like him either. So
Never liked him. Never.
Why wouldn't he want to come here? Just
Colton Parayko carried him. He's a bum.
I don't know. There's
We're
lots of other
great.
places.
Chris, come on, why doesn't he want to come here?
I don't know the answer. I've been told that I don't think that he's someone, and I don't think the Leafs have no money to spend right now. I mean,
right.
To sign him, honestly, they'd have to trade like 3 players away. And I think they're probably going to trade one for sure, probably 2 to sort of start balancing things with the cap in the off season. But there's no way that they'd be in the mix. Hey, let's move on from that thought altogether.
Yeah.
But what I mean in general.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a less high-profile free agent, one that plays forward and would maybe get $3 million on the open market. I mean, he might only get $1 million in this new scenario. And so I think free agents will make decisions for different reasons than they have in the past. And Kyle Dubas, I actually read a story yesterday, Jonas Siegel did for The Athletic, kind of hinted at this. He didn't spell it out as explicitly as I am, but that the Leafs are hoping there'll be a destination maybe for players that realize, okay, there isn't really money to be made on the free market the way there used to be. I'm going to go play somewhere else for different reasons, and maybe try
some money in endorsements. We can give you endorsements.
If you're not going to make a ton of money, maybe you want to go play close to home, right? Or play somewhere you have a chance to win a cup. So I think it's going to be a fascinating offseason. I think you're going to see crazy stuff happen once we get there.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, just to confirm, so you're confident, and are you confident that other teams are confident that the salary cap will not go down?
Yes, but I don't think it's going to go up, and I don't think it's going to go up for years. I mean, this is the effects of this from a business standpoint are going to be felt for a long time.
Yeah,
and so it's that'll have ramifications I probably haven't even wrapped my head around. I mean, who knows? Maybe players will have a salary rollback, which is something they did out of the 04-05 lockout.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen here. I think that you are going to see a new CBA come out of this. If you were looking for silver linings, that could be one. If you're a sheer hockey fan who doesn't want to even think about the L word that's hung around this league every 7 to 8 years, I think that we're in a very good position here not to have another one of those L words. And, I think the system will change because it's going to be demanded. I mean, this is such an unprecedented, unparalleled time. There's going to have to be different rules here at play.
Do you think there's going to be potentially the addition of compliance buyouts, but do you think they'd revisit that option?
I think it's a possibility. It's not a certainty. Players might not honestly mind them. It's a way for them to get paid and to get another contract, right? And we've seen a number of guys over the years that are still, I think Mikhail Grabovski's still getting paid money from his compliance buyout from the Leafs, even though he's well into retirement. So, in a weird way, it's almost, I guess it's better to get 100% of your money instead of 66%, which is how it works out. But it's almost like a deferred payment plan that helps you ease your way into retirement, and you can get another job and still get paid in the meantime. So I think it's a possibility, but I don't know for sure. And I don't think they've even really got there yet, truthfully, in terms of that level of negotiation on the CBA. But they're going to have to do stuff like that to make this transition, because the system wasn't built for this. The system wasn't built thinking about a pandemic that might halt a season literally in its tracks with really not all that much advance warning.
Right. Well, it's a once a century, at least from what we've seen so far, and hopefully an occurrence, right? Let's hope. So then looking at the Leafs kind of more specifically on this, there was rumors that Andreas Johnston might have been traded had he not gone down with that pretty nasty injury. I don't know how you can trade him now because he's had that pretty nasty injury. He's got to come back and show that he's still Andreas Johnston, right? Usually after an injury like that, GMs they might have liked the player before, but we don't know what he is now. So you're sort of trading at a loss. Kerfoot, Kapanen, Johnston, that third line, second line-ish group of guys. I've heard things floated recently. People are, they're just going down into the pits, right? We're all looking for content. We're all looking for things to write about. But I read something this morning, I think on Leafs Nation, that was saying, why not trade all of them? And I know you'll laugh at that. But
why not?
I think this plays into how good is Nick Robertson, and is he ready to go? And number two is, how many of those guys are going to be around, and can they find that right-handed shot help that they desperately need with one or two of those guys gone?
Well, the good news is that Nick Robertson's ready to fill that big hole on D.
There it is. Tombstone.
Take a bow, Mr. Johnston. Take a bow.
Sorry, it was just on the plate there.
Yes.
You guys do the rest of the show.
It will never die. Never.
Have you ever fully explained how you made that mistake?
I just fucked up, Chris. It's not that intricate. I don't know why I thought the only thing, the thing that people kept asking me is, did you mean this? Because his brother is a defenseman, right? That's the only thing I can think of that I would have seen that made me think that. I don't know why. And I put a ton of time into the prospect pyramid every year. It takes forever. It is not a video I look forward to making every year because it takes forever. How did I get their biggest prospect? How did I screw that up? I don't know. At least
you've made good out of it.
Yeah, he was a really good sport about it. The Petes were a really good sport. I mean, underrated part of that video, I'm like, yeah, SDA and Nick Robertson are on the Petes, but they kind of consistently suck. So we'll see how that goes. And sure enough, they look geared up for a Memorial Cup. And he scored, I think it was 55 goals or something like that. Thank God he was a good sport.
I grew up going to Pete's games, so I don't appreciate those kind of comments there from the cheap seats.
Well, this Jens fan sends his apologies. Oh yeah, that's right. Peterborough's just a hop, skip, and a jump from Coburg.
Yeah, it's actually almost equidistant with Oshawa, but we didn't want to take the 4-1 when I was a kid. So up Highway 28, we went a ton. My dad was a season ticket holder. Saw the Stalls play there.
Wow.
Steve Downey was a really good Pete.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
names.
Yeah, this was years ago though. Years ago. Now they suck. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, then they had a great year this year.
No, they were spectacular this year. I liked SDA's Instagram post. He was, I think he was playing hockey with his dog. And he's like, this is what happens when I don't have Nick Robertson to pass to. He actually took a shot. It was crazy. Wow.
Yeah, so Peterborough had this guy that scored more than a goal a game. And if you're the Leafs, you're saying, what do we do with him next season?
And Marner made the jump. Marner and Robertson was scoring at a Marner pace, right?
Mhm.
When Marner won the Memorial Cup and all that sort of thing and jumped into the NHL the next season. You know, do you bring him up? And, you know, Marner started on the third. I hate to keep bringing up Marner, but wingers. Nick Robertson can play center, but you would expect in the NHL he's not going to be playing center right away, if ever.
And kill penalties.
And he can kill penalties and that sort of thing. But, you know, they put Marner on the third line with JVR and Bozak, third line. And that's how they started him, and that's where he started his career. Is that sort of how they could see him? Because is he like? Can they really? Is there really a scenario where he goes back to the OHL?
I think there is one. It's probably not the preferred route right now.
Okay,
I'm sure for him, but especially for the Leafs, I think, you know, the summer is going to be interesting. You know, whoever wrote that article, Trade Them All, it might be onto something in a way, because in terms of getting any, in terms of creating any amount of room here. I mean, look, we already know they're letting Cody Ceci walk. I expect them to let Tyson Barrie walk, and even with that, I mean, they're still right up against the cap. And even if you trade Captain, who I think would certainly get you back something good, you know, good in return, you're only opening up another $3 million. I mean, I think that they have to be creative here if they stick to the idea of not trading any of the big boys. And certainly that's where I believe the organization has been at. I don't know if the current universe changes anything for them in terms of now knowing that the cap, you know, probably isn't going to go up much at all, if at all, in the next 2 or 3 seasons. You know, maybe they revisit, you know, having $40 million tied up in 4 forwards. But if you're not trading one of the big guys, which I'm certainly not advocating, I think you're going to see them have to move out 2 or 3 players just to have the kind of flexibility you need. And that might open a spot for Nick Robertson, because, you know, it's going to be a tough year for him. Let's face it, if he has to go back to the OHL where he kind of did everything. He had a chance to play at the World Juniors. I mean, you know, this guy wants to be in the NHL. Every player does, but, you know, he probably feels as though he's proven everything he has to prove at that level.
What do you think about Pierre Engvall at center? Like a third line center, like, do you know, maybe platooning with Spezza? So one, you know, depending upon, because Spezza can play it for a while. You would think Jason Spezza will be back if you know, if they can get him at league min. Okay, so if they can get him at league min, you know, because that's the thing, is that we weren't totally sold on Kerfoot at center on third. Pierre Engvall had a great season until they decided to sign him to an extension, and then he didn't. And you know, so then you're looking at maybe potentially either a Spezza Robertson or an Engvall Robertson, which honestly doesn't sound so bad. Just the Engvall Robertson experience thing might throw a few people. Engvall's a little bit older than people actually remember, though, because he's been developing for a while.
I'm not sold on him as an NHLer yet, honestly.
Engvall?
Yes.
Interesting.
Dude,
what? Tell us.
I've got concerns there. I mean, what did he go, 18 or 19 games to end the season? He had 1 goal, and it was against David Ayres. And obviously they're not looking for him to be a goal scorer, but I don't know. I mean, he's got some physical attributes that jump out at you, but he's not a slam dunk NHLer for me on this team, especially if the Leafs bring in more players, if they sign anyone else out of Europe, which I think is possible. You know, if they have some choice, I think he's going to be fighting for a job in training camp.
Okay. So
dude, oh God,
what?
There were.
Do you guys love him? Sorry, I didn't know that I was.
No. I love
did.
hearing Steve when Steve goes.
Steve did, yeah.
When he first came up, I was about a hot week away from getting an Engvall jersey. I just loved the guy so much. I loved him as a Marley man. I loved him as a Marley. He scores that shorthanded goal in Keefe's first game. It was great. He was on like a 40-point pace, not a lick of power play time. He signed that contract and turned into a pumpkin, like right away. It was the most bizarre thing. Chris is right, man. CJ's right.
Okay. I still think he's got something to prove, even after earning that contract. I mean, this organization isn't afraid to pay him $1 million to be a Marley again if he doesn't earn a spot. I think
it's a variable amount, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's close. 1.1 is it or so? Anyway,
1.25, I think.
Yeah, and
it's pretty much fully variable. Either way, Keefe even had some tough words about him towards the end. It all gets lost in the mush, but I do think that he's still got to fight for a spot, and I'm not giving him. I'm not writing his name in pen right now for doing 2020-21 Leafs.
But I will throw this out there though. We already know Nick Robertson knows how to play with a right-handed playmaker. Him and Spezza. That gets me a little excited.
Spezza looks good. I mean, like he didn't even look tired. Like he looked good.
No,
he wasn't Jason Spezza of 15 years ago, but who cares? Like he was pretty.
I thought he was really good in some games. Honestly, like
the best player some nights.
Like there was times he was carrying the puck well. Obviously, speed's never been his thing, but he still had vision. He still was useful on the second power play. I mean, for league minimum, that's all you can ask for. Plus, he's just a super guy. I mean, if you want to cheer for people in this game, he's a very easy person to cheer for. He's a real class act. And the truth is, you get to the end of the kind of career he's had, not everyone wants to keep playing. And the fact that he's willing to basically put money and ego aside, role aside, just to be part of this. I mean, I think those are nice stories in sports. Because
especially
unfortunately,
with the Leafs.
Well, and so many people end up at the end of their careers for a lot of reasons, bitter about the business of the sport and what it's done to him. And he's just still loves it so much. And you know, he kind of idolizes the Leafs in the way that Steve does, except that he gets to actually play for them. And there's something quite endearing about his desire to be here.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think there's any risk from the organization. I mean, if he's taken league minimum again, if he shows his age by next year, if it looks like he can't play, I think he would step aside and retire or have the contract sent to the Marlies or what have you. But I don't see any risk in bringing him back. And I actually think it's about 99%. Maybe not signed on like a contract, but I think it's understood that there's a fit there on both sides.
Let me just jump in here for a second. The article I was referencing earlier, Chris, when we talked about Kerfoot, Kapanen, and Johnston, is the Leafs are sitting. It's called "The Leafs Are Sitting on a Mountain of Wingers," and it is from theleafsnation.com. John Seitzer is the guy that wrote it. It's a fascinating sort of read, short read. But so if you do trade Kapanen, Kerfoot, Johnston, what's the return look like? Are they losing on those? Or is that something where they do go out and try to find the next, like, is it the next Tyson Barrie trade with maybe perhaps a guy who's a better fit? Do you revisit what happened with Calgary? They seem to have some sort of trade partner there, although I think TJ Brodie's up at the
Brodie's a free agent now. So
yeah, and so is Travis
might still be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, what do you think they do?
Well, I think it's going to be tough to trade Andreas Johnsson. I mean, any player that's had a 6-month layoff after a knee injury, you know, if you're trading him, you might even be sweetening that deal. I know that sounds crazy in a sense, but I don't think he's a tradable asset, especially at a time when most of the league is feeling a cap crunch.
Right.
Because you do still have 3 more years, including next season, on his deal. And that could be a good thing if he returns to pre-injury form. But, you know, I just think that that's a tough trade to make. I mean, with the other guys, they're more movable. I think Kapanen, because he has one skill set that is, we could term elite, that every scout that's ever been through watching the Leafs will notice his speed and you know, the fact that I think he's become a pretty nice penalty killer because of that and you know, does some things at a very high level and is still pretty young. You know, he's the most movable guy. I'm sure the Leafs don't want to move him for that reason. It's not as though they don't like him as well, but you know, at some point I think they're going to have to get creative. And I just have the feeling with the way this season went, this is more reading between the lines than anything explicitly someone's told me. But I just think you're going to see some creativity out of this front office. Like in some ways, the current situation demands it of them because of what's happened to this business. It's taken an abrupt turn from where we were. If we had this conversation in mid-January, this wasn't probably on any of our radars at this point, and to where we are now, you know, not yet at mid-April. So a lot's changed in the world. But, you know, I got the feeling between Brendan Shanahan and talking with him a little bit, and just some of the comments Kyle Dubas has made publicly, that they understand they got to take another go at this. And I think they've learned some things. I think, you know, the Clifford trade, for example, is a little bit of an acknowledgement that they had to acquire some of the aspects maybe that front office hasn't been deemed to have liked. And I think you're going to see some creativity and probably a few surprises out of them this offseason, because the cap basically demands it of them, but I think their season demands it of them. I mean, they can't come back with the same thing and expect different results.
So there was a fake there was a
fake. Just going to bring this up.
There it is. Kyle Clifford rumor out there about him getting 3 years, $2 million.
TJ, I don't know, or sorry, TJ, CJ, I don't know if you saw Steve's reaction to it.
I flipped my shit.
It was pretty ugly.
Who was it from?
Maybe
was
it was. former scout guy. He says he's a former scout. Apparently, he's full of shit. But
It was bullshit.
Nobody relevant within the media circles.
No. I would expect it to be coming from you, Elliot, Bob.
All I know is there's interest in getting a deal done from both sides.
But it costs the Leafs a pick if they do. Is that something they want to do for Kyle Clifford?
It upgrades the pick, right? It moves up.
It upgrades it. Oh, okay.
I mean, it has to be factored into the decision. I think that they like him enough; they would do it. But look, he's coming back on a team-friendly deal, or it's not happening. I mean, there's just right now the Leafs honestly have some challenges in signing Ilya Mikheyev back, and I think that it's not to say they won't do that, but they need everyone at the bottom end of the lineup to be buying into this, and there's no chance. I would eat my shoe, as I said on the radio at some point, if he gets $2 million AAV from the Leafs. I don't see that being something the team's going to do.
Well, may you stay hungry. How do you negotiate a deal like Ilya Mikheyev? That's such a strange one because he had a good start to his rookie season, not mind-blowing, but good. You could play him with John Tavares. You could play him on the penalty kill. He was extremely useful. You have a great relationship with his agent, but he played what, like 30 games?
And look good, but it was just 30 games.
Right. So, like, how do you even?
I'm getting a call that I should take.
Take your call.
Take it. I gotta go
take your call.
Yeah, take it. I gotta go pee.
The Presser. SDP. The Steve Dangle Press Conference.
So as you saw, CJ had to take a phone call. So we thought, what the heck? We're sitting here anyway. He's got important people to talk to. We have each other. So let's do. Jesse, what do you want to do?
I want to do Adam's History Corner.
How did it become there's not even a corner. Like, I don't.
This is the corner of the podcast where we do history.
Adam Wild's History Bed Sheet. I like corner better.
Me too.
All right.
So Danger Ferguson hit me up on IG DMs, and he said, have a request for the next history segment of the SDP. Does Adam also cover the American Civil War? If so, can he cover the Battle of Gettysburg?
I have been to Gettysburg. I took a tour at Gettysburg.
Oh.
And I guess how old I was when I took the tour at Gettysburg.
31.
Guess.
8.
Wow. Right.
And we went to Gettysburg. We went to Gettysburg because I was obsessed with Gettysburg as an 8-year-old. It's just a fascinating time in history. But one of my mom's friends got me a book about Gettysburg for my birthday that year, and she said I had to ask your mom if this was okay because it was from my friend who was also 7 or 8 years old, but it was it was a history book. I didn't think anything of it, but she's like, "Are you sure you're okay with me, Marilyn, giving your son a book about the American Civil War?" And my mom's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. Whatever." It's it could have been a lot worse. So I got
violent,
but very violent. And, actually, you know what? Before we get into this, I've got the best story for you. So grade 1, you know how they make you make a card for your mom on Mother's Day in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. My mom has this card still. I put a little Union soldier and a little Confederate soldier shooting each other, and I said, "Happy Mother's Day."
Why did you think she'd want that?
Man, I wasn't thinking about what she wanted. I was thinking about what I wanted, obviously. I got to get her to dig it up because it is.
Oh, my God.
What a loser.
So much wrong with it.
You're a
gosh.
nerd.
Oh, yeah.
Dork.
Just nerd. And
God.
So much wrong with that. But my mom, the little Union and little Confederate soldiers shooting at each other. But yeah, no. So the Battle of Gettysburg.
No, just transition out of that. Go ahead.
You know when Steve says different dude, he's not kidding. It took me a while to realize that this shit wasn't normal, but that's just who I am. I don't know why I'm this way. This is just the way I am.
Everyone's got that.
It's like if I made a birthday card, "Happy Birthday, Grandpa," and it's him shooting Hitler. Which would be a great card.
Great. I'm sure he would have appreciated it more than my mom did for Mother's Day. But yeah, so Gettysburg's a really interesting battle for a lot of reasons. But chiefly, it is known as sort of the turning point in that war. And, it's funny, put aside, if you can, the fact that, the ideologies of both sides, right? You've got the North fighting for many things, but the thing chiefly that we know of today is obviously the abolition of slavery, which strangely didn't happen until the war started, when Abraham Lincoln made the proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation. So you've got that, and you've got the Confederates fighting for Southern rights and things of that nature, right? That's their and they're fighting essentially to create their own country. They don't want to be a part of the United States anymore. And so weirdly enough, the best general that the Union Army has, Robert E. Lee, defects at the beginning of the war and goes to the Confederate side because he believed in states' rights, and he also believed in loyalty to your state rather than your country, which was a prevailing thought in a lot of places in the United States back then, and still sort of is today. Didn't like it's a small federal government, and the states sort of look after themselves. That was sort of the point. And so he leaves, and he's like, I can't fight against Virginia. So he goes and joins the Confederate Army, and they have this run of absolutely stunning victories. Absolutely stunning victories. So you're talking about an army that is undersupplied. Most of their soldiers didn't have proper uniforms. In a lot of cases, they were barefoot. These are poor and extremely high morale army. And then the Union on the other side has, the first guy I believe was like a drunk. The second guy the first guy that they had as a general was this really conservative guy who didn't want to move the army and was enjoying being general too much to actually fight anything. And then he kept losing. And then they have another guy who I think was a drunk. And then they have this guy, Ulysses S. Grant, who eventually became president.
Wasn't he a drunk too?
I think most, by our standards, a lot of people back then were. But Grant and Lee were
I'm going by Family Guy, by the way.
Yeah. So Grant and Lee go head to head, and this is sort of like the heavyweight bout, and it happens in 3 different days. Back then when they fought a battle, they went to the battle, they fought for 5 or 6 hours, and then they walked away. Especially the retreating army. They were rarely pursued because the way that armaments were set up back then, it was all very defensive. You marched down and met each other in the middle and shot at each other, and then somebody ran, and that was it. And then you had some artillery bombardment and that sort of thing. But what happened here was the South, who were riding this wave, and I think a little bit had abated at this point, they attack, and they make this pretty grandiose attack on the first day up a couple of little hills. I think it was I forget what they were, little round top or something like that. Anyway, the Union troops at the top run out of bullets. So the commander's like, I don't know what to do. And the Southern guys who are coming up the mountain they're known for you've heard a rebel yell, right? It's this yelp that they did. So it would make them sound like they were bigger and larger than they actually were. So it would make their army sound huge. And it was something that we believe they picked up from the Native Americans, who also did the same thing. It was to make your numbers sound bigger. And it used to chill the shit out of the Union Army. It used to freak them out. So this commander who's at the top of this hill, and this is just one little story of many, says, okay, we're out of bullets. We're completely out of bullets. So what are we going to do? Those big sharp knives they put on the end of those muskets, the bayonets? We're just going to charge them. And he charged them right down the hill and beat them. And that was sort of like a whoa moment. Now the whole engagement ends 2 days later with a huge Confederate defeat. They march out to the middle of the field. The Union kind of stuffs it, and that was sort of it for the Confederate Army for the rest of the war. After that, it was like loss. And they talk about this period after the Civil War called Reconstruction, where they literally had to rebuild the South because the Union armies came in and they would just burn the cities down in a lot of cases because it's war, and that's what happened. So the Gettysburg itself is fascinating because it's 3 separate engagements that could have gone either way. And the thinking was, if the South had won, it would have been very, very, very difficult for the Union to win the war. Not because they weren't better supplied, bigger, more economically powerful, but because the appetite for warfare in those northern states was really going down. People were tired of their sons getting drafted and pulled into the army. They were tired of, losing their money over this. They were tired of war. And Lincoln, his whole presidency, kind of sort of rested on that as well. And then, of course, it's famous because Lincoln came and gave the Gettysburg Address afterwards. And it's one of the only major battles between Napoleon and World War I that occurred in the world. You had, the Crimean War a little bit. You had this and that. But essentially, the world went about a century without a major conflict, a major European conflict. So there's only this one conflict in the United States that is the Civil War, that this experiment, which America was and is, this great Republican experiment, tore itself apart for 3 years. And the fact that it came back together, like if you really study American history, it's an absolute, it's crazy that these 50, back then it was less than 50 states, but these states have held together as long as they have. Because if you look over world history, it just doesn't happen. And so the whole world was watching because there was a lot of people in England and France and many other places. France had gone from a monarchy to a constitutional monarchy to a revolutionary government to Bonaparte, back to a monarchy, back to an empire. And there was a lot of people in Europe who believed, this is why democracy can't work. This is why democracy can't work, because they can't hold it together. They couldn't even put it together for 100 years. And the fact that Gettysburg went the North's way is a lot of the reason why, at least in theory, people theorize that the United States is still united at this point. Now, the North probably still could have won, but the question was there a public will to win? And in a democracy situation, that really matters. And the South's biggest problem in that war was the fact that they were pro-slavery. And that's the South's biggest problem in that context in any sense. But from a worldwide view, there's nothing that England, especially at this time, wanted more than to see the United States sort of broken up, cut in half. But
is that what would have happened if the South won the entire Civil War?
That's what they were fighting for, yeah. And they were fighting to get into the heads of the Union Army because they couldn't beat them face to face. It'd be like me fighting Mike Tyson. I'm not going to outslug him. I'm not going to outslug him. So I got to get in his head and kill his will to fight. And that's what the South almost had. They were that close. And so, without that, there's no abolition of slavery in the South. There's a bunch of other things that didn't go, that it was a good thing that the South didn't win. And there was no European power at the time that was worth anything, Britain and France. They were not going to support the South because they were abolitionist states, meaning they no longer believed in slavery and did not have slavery in any of their colonies anymore either. So, England can't say we're going to support, the Confederate States because we cannot support a government that wants slavery. So if they had dropped the slavery issue, if they had dropped that and said, no, we're going to abolish slavery, they probably could have had England and France on their side.
Wow. It was that simple.
It was that simple, but they could not be supported. And so anyway, it's there. I'm again oversimplifying to the max here, but it cannot be overstated how important that battle was to American history. It really, it kind of cooked the South's goose. Really, just it sort of destroyed the war effort because they lost a lot of people, cavalry units. I think, but it made or break. It was a make or break moment, and it broke them.
And Gettysburg is where?
It's in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can take a tour. You can take a guided tour. At the time, they had like these cassette tape tours that you would rent the cassette and you'd actually play it in your cassette player and walk around. Yeah. We actually had somebody that took us around, which you can do. And they take you to all the spots. And it's crazy because there's houses there that still have bullet holes in them. They still have little musket ball shots. Yeah, there's a farmhouse that happened to be in the middle of the major engagement on the third day that's still standing, that has bullet holes everywhere in it. And it's just crazy to see. So it's, for me, like my little 8-year-old heart was singing. I found it fascinating. I still do. But it's a pivotal moment in American history. And there were a lot of major powers, because you remember America was not the preeminent power in the world at that time. a lot of major powers were watching this to see what's warfare look like, because it's been 40 years since we fought one, you know? And that was sort of the thing. It's like there was observers there going, how are they doing this? So anyway, there's the history corner, and CJ's back. Hey!
Perfect timing.
Jesse's got. We were talking about players, but Jesse, you have a question about Freddie Anderson.
Yeah, it goes along to what we were talking about before, and just re-signing players. And do you see Frederik Andersen coming back at the end of the 2021 season? Did he play himself into a contract that's going to be too big by having a good year to start the year and the previous year before? Or did he kind of play himself out of that contract range by not having such a great end to the season where it ended? Do you see him coming back as a Leaf?
It's so hard to say. I mean, I certainly see him back for next season because I don't think there's any real harm in bringing him back, even if he hasn't been extended, if it's just for the last year. But what happens beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, clearly they like the guy. I think Freddie's very close with his teammates. I mean, he's quarantining with Austin Matthews right now in Phoenix during the coronavirus period. You know, just says enough right there about how close those two are. I think he likes Toronto, but, you know, there is a scenario where they're not able to pay him. I don't know if they're going to be able to pay him even any more than the $5 million he makes now, especially if we're looking at a flat salary cap. And so, you know, I think a lot of it will end up coming down to how he plays between now and the end of his contract in terms of the Leafs' level of interest. I have to believe his interest will be high. I think he wants to be somewhere where he's a number one, and he's unquestionably been that his entire stint with the Leafs. He's played a lot of games, probably too many games for the organization's liking. But, you know, he's a TBD to me. I can't really handicap it too strongly one way or the other, except to say I do think that they will bring him back for next year for the last year of his deal.
What would be the option if they didn't have him? Like what? I mean, are their prospects are not close, are they?
I guess you hope one of them is, you know, 2 years from now, or you go out and get another goalie. I mean, you know, it would be a tough situation. I mean, I have to believe the best outcome for the people involved here is that Freddie continues playing well. Maybe next year that he plays 50 games instead of 60 something, and that Jack Campbell is a more stabilizing backup, that he has lots of success, and that he wants to stick around and isn't going to, you know, drive a hard bargain to do so. But I just see a lot of buts potentially that could pop up in there, you know, right down to his performance. I mean, he didn't play as well, at least statistically this year, as he has his previous every year in the NHL, but certainly his years in Toronto. And so, you know, if that holds as a trend, if he does have some struggles, the organization might be left with almost no choice but to look somewhere else. It's so tricky. I mean, when you have a solid number one, which he's been, you never think about that position. You just roll the guy out there and he is what he is. But if you're a team that's looking for that, it can be hard to find. And you know, I'm no goalie expert, but, you know, a guy like Joseph Woll with Leafs having the organization, I don't know that you could ever say 2 years from now he's going to be ready to be the number one. I think that's a pretty tall order, but maybe they go with some sort of 50-50 split for that season if they don't bring Anderson back. I mean, I think there are other options out there, and every year there's usually a couple good goalies on the market. I think the one mistake, if we're looking back on the Leafs season they made clearly, is not having a proper backup. I don't think you'll see Kyle Dubas repeat that one, because it was a huge factor in their season. And honestly, I think if you just had Jack Campbell all year, which of course he wasn't necessarily available in a trade before the year, but, you know, the Leafs probably had 6 more points anyway, maybe even more than that in the bank, just from some of the games they frittered away with Michael Hutchinson and Ned, and they never would have really been on the playoff bubble, and it would have been a totally different feeling around their entire season.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
So two questions on the Jack Campbell front, because I've heard it suggested that the organization seems to think he has number one potential, but what you just said there didn't really instill a whole lot of confidence.
I mean, look, maybe he does. He did have one really good year in LA, but he hasn't shown it anywhere in the NHL. Really, he's 28, right?
Right.
You know, his track record doesn't suggest he's going to be a 50 to 60 game starter in the league. Now, I'll gladly eat my words if I end up being wrong on that. But I don't think he's of the same pedigree as someone like Frederik Andersen. And I don't think he needs to be. I mean, look, even with the contract extension he has kicking in starting next year, I mean, he's paid under $2 million. I mean, he's paid like a backup. I think that's what he is. You hope that he's the kind of backup that you can trust, not just in those back-to-backs and all those types of things. I do think you're going to see the Leafs go to something more like a platoon in the next season with him and Anderson. But I don't see him stealing the number one job. I think that would only happen if Anderson was injured and they were forced into it or something like that. But I don't think that's really the thought of him. And honestly, one thing we haven't factored in here is at the end of 2021 season, there's an expansion draft. And at this point in time, I assume that Jack Campbell would be exposed in that draft. Certainly not saying Seattle will take him. It's impossible to handicap that this far out. But there is a chance that the Leafs end up losing him in the expansion draft in a year's time.
That's if they don't sign. I mean, Freddie would be up, wouldn't he?
Freddie would be up, but you have to expose at least one goalie under contract.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, that was a big deal when they acquired him, because then they gained a goalie that they could expose in the draft.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, and look, it's not to say that when they acquired him, they did it because they have to expose him. I think it's more they have options, right? I think one thing the Leafs do really well, honestly, in their deals is they address the sort of immediate obvious need, but they always add one or two other little small things that don't always get attention like that, but they sort of solve a small future problem in addition to dealing in the moment. I mean, obviously at that time, the game at Madison Square Garden, they got Jack Campbell. You couldn't roll Michael Hutchinson out there anymore. I mean, the guy, I can't believe they, but also that week, remember they played almost a perfect game against Florida. He came in that game because Anderson got injured in the third period. Like, it's going through him from everywhere. I mean, that was probably one of the Leafs' best games just from the way they played. And it was a huge game in terms of the standings. And there's no reason they shouldn't have won that one, let alone won it in regulation. And they lost it in regulation. They let the goalie thing drag on way too long before addressing it. So anyway, they addressed that immediate need with that trade, but they also solved some future issues with it. And I think that's it's a feather in the cap of their front office. I think that they do a lot of logical things when it comes to these moves.
Early in the season, something you talked about earlier is if they had addressed the backup thing sooner, maybe Babcock would still have his job. I can't help but think, but game 3 of the season, they played 2 great games. I think it was against Ottawa and Columbus. Game
Montreal.
3, they're up 4-1 on Montreal, and they blow it. Now,
In the third period.
In the third period. Now, Kasperi Kapanen temporarily lost his mind and threw his stick, but like you can't allow that many goals. It was Matthews that even forced that game to overtime, and then later the shootout. The other thing I had there with Campbell is, so there's a conditional pick in that trade. It's a third that turns into a second if Clifford re-signs or if Campbell won X amount of games.
6 games, yeah.
6 games, and he didn't, right?
No, he won 3.
He won 3. So if fantasy scenario, if they don't bring back Clifford, what the heck happens to that pick? Because I got to imagine the LA Kings would be justified in maybe taking that to some sort of arbitration.
Except there won't be, because the way those conditions are written is he wins 6 games. It doesn't say
right. Okay.
If he gets, because he could have got injured, right? Like they could have brought him in the first game. He gets injured. He doesn't play again this season. He didn't win 6 games. I think so. Those types of trades to me are going to be black and white with the league. I mean, it's really crappy. I mean, I don't even think that trade is a great example of it. But there's a few others. There's a condition in that Lucic Neil deal about Neil getting to 21 goals, and he had 19 and probably would have got to 21 to the last X amount of games. Stuff like that I could see some frustration over. But to me, those are black and white. You can't go back and say, you can't undo. I mean, really, the condition wasn't met. And in this case, LA might be lucky, because I do think there's at least a decent chance here that Kyle Clifford will resign with Toronto and they'll get that second rounder anyway. But if that doesn't happen, it's going to be a third rounder.
There were 20 teams interested in him. He's not a superstar, but when you hear 20 teams are interested in a player, you think, well, he's got to be somewhat good. What do the Leafs have in Barabanov?
Well, they don't even know, right? And so certainly I don't know for sure. I think the reason what they have is a lottery ticket, though. And in the past, some of these lottery tickets have paid off. Now, looking at what this guy has done offensively in the KHL, I don't see anything in there to suggest he's going to even have the kind of impact that Ilya Mikheyev did last year for the Leafs. But, most scouts that I talk to on him certainly believe he's a player that plays in your lineup tomorrow. And that's how the Leafs are viewing this. That's the pretenses under which they signed him. I mean, he had that degree of interest. He was going to get at least a handshake promise that he's going to be playing in the NHL. And I think one reason the Leafs have been really good at getting these guys out of Russia is they've always honored those commitments. Even with Igor Ozaganov, they played him. It didn't go well.
Yeah, sure did.
He left. But my point is they gave him the chance, which is what obviously these guys want when they come over. And so, there's a lot of X factors here. This is another player that doesn't speak English. There's going to be a culture shock. He's going to be on the smaller rink and all these things. But, he's played at the Olympics. He's played at the World Hockey Championship against NHL players, and he's been on the best team, or one of the best teams, certainly in the KHL, for the last 7 seasons. So, I think what they have is for sure someone that can play in the bottom 6. Maybe there's a little bit of untapped skill in there. We won't really know till we get to see him. But I think the value for the Leafs is, look, he costs $925,000 on the cap. If he's a player, that's a huge bonus. If he's not, there's lots of things they can do. He can go back to Russia. They can send him to the Marlies. It's a low risk gamble. And given the success they had with Mikheyev, I think that there's every reason to take this chance now.
And you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket.
Whoa!
I never buy the ticket. Do you guys buy the tickets?
I don't. I don't. No. I spend my money elsewhere. But Jesse plays.
I have. I've done all right in the lottery. Well, Jesse and I did something with OLG recently.
Mm-hmm.
And
so we support OLG.
Yeah. No, we got a gift card. I think it was $150 worth of gift card for the lottery, and I won $151.
Are you making that up?
No.
That's awesome.
I took mine, and I took some of it, and I bet on the Super Bowl, and I won. So
see if you're good at fantasy, it's almost a better investment. You win
a lot
smaller,
more than I did.
But you can still win something. Yeah.
You won a lot more than I did. Will the season end? I don't know.
No. Yeah, I should have put money on that at the beginning of the year. Chris, we obviously, we've taken up enough of your time. So we want to thank you.
I don't think so, Chris.
We really do want to thank you for coming on.
I'm not doing that much, man. I got my track pants on. I'm just chilling. So.
Me too.
I was genuinely wondering. Thank you for painting that picture.
But we really,
I'm dressed. It's just I'm not dressed in a way I ever would be at work normally.
Yeah. Well, listen, we just want to say we genuinely appreciate it. It's great to see you again, even if it's on video conference.
Yeah. You've been great to us. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for continuing to come on this show and alleviate some fear for sure. Like that's the number one thing for us is that you make the pit in my stomach go away, which is nice. And I think that's for Steve too, but also for your insight and knowledge into this stuff. I'm sure you get tired of these questions. I'm sure that every bloody dinner party you go to, you get the same questions that we asked you today. But we really genuinely appreciate everything you bring to the show because every time you come on, it's dynamite. So thank you.
I'm really big with middle-aged men. There's a lot of when I'm in random social situations, there's always a middle-aged man that wants to come over and ask me some question about something. Some trade condition, what have you.
I don't know if they want to ask you their question as much as they want to tell you their answer.
Right.
How often does that happen to you?
Yeah.
Oh, every day. Literally once a day I get something like that happen. It's you know what? I love it. At first I was uncomfortable with it because it's sort of weird, this idea that people are stopping you on the street and stuff. But I appreciate that people care that much. And even in the social distancing times, like a couple times I've been out for a walk and one guy just yelled like, Chris Johnston, are they going to play again?
Are they getting Pietrangelo?
So even in this time when obviously everyone's mind is everywhere, I'll still get stopped on the street literally every day if I go out where people are at in downtown Toronto. So I appreciate that. It's fun.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to name this episode Pietrangelo Hates Toronto.
No, you're not.
According to Chris Johnston.
Here's the thing. I will own it when I make headlines, but there was no headlines to be made today. So
okay. All right.
The next visit, I'm gonna come back either when there's maybe a resolution to the season, when we can really stir it up and make some big headlines. I'll be back.
Okay.
But right now it's all speculation for everybody, right? We don't know if there's going to be games. We're all kind of stuck in this netherworld.
Well, we're thrilled to hear that. You come back and drop headlines on us anytime. And, Chris, I have to say, I'm going to talk about him if he's not here. He's one of the genuine good people that you'll meet in life, just in general. Forget hockey. So, Chris, it's such a pleasure to have you on, and thank you so much.
Thanks for this game of catch, pal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
I watched Tiger King. That's my other confession. I watched Tiger King.
Okay, so
Good
hold on,
watch.
quickly. Carol Baskin.
She did.
She
it.
did that shit.
Oh,
She
yeah.
did- allegedly.
No,
You have to say,
no
but
way
you have to
she
say
did it.
allegedly. But you do have to say allegedly.
No, she did
No
it.
way. She did it. You can title this option. You can title this episode "She Did It."
Oh, there you go. There's the hot. Yeah, articles will be written about it. Chris, thanks so much, man.
All right, guys, be safe out there.
The Steve Dangle Podcast. Follow the guys on Twitter at Steve_Dangle, at Adam WYLDE, and at Jesse Blake. Brought to you by Panago Pizza. Order at panago.com and stuff your face with deliciousness. Connection complete.